A poor girl and her puppy approach a paralyzed CEO, asking for food, but she says something he'll never forget. She predicts the exact day his life will hang forever. When that day comes, he walks again and uncovers a secret that shatters his past. Before the story begins, wherever life has placed you today, this message is for you. The December wind cut through downtown Chicago like a blade, carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of another lonely evening. Michael Harrison wheeled himself through the familiar glass doors of Giuseppe's, the Italian restaurant where he'd eaten lunch alone every Tuesday for the past 3 years. At 42, the CEO of Harrison Industries had built an empire from his wheelchair, but success couldn't fill the hollow ache in his chest. "The usual table, Mr. Harrison?" Maria, the hostess, asked with practiced warmth. Michael nodded, maneuvering his chair toward the corner booth that overlooked the bustling street. His lunch arrived without him having to order, chicken parmigiana, the same meal every week. Routine was his anchor in a world that had shifted beneath him 30 years ago, when a drunk driver had stolen his ability to walk. Halfway through his meal, a small shadow appeared beside his table. Michael looked up to see a little girl, no more than 8, with tangled brown hair and eyes that seemed to hold galaxies of sadness. In her arms, she cradled a small, shivering puppy, a golden retriever mix with ribs showing through its matted fur. "Excuse me, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's chatter. "I'm really sorry to bother you, but—" She glanced down at the puppy, then back at him. "We haven't eaten anything today. Could you maybe spare just a little bit?" Michael's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Something about her sincere desperation, the way she held the puppy like it was her most precious possession, struck him deeper than any board meeting or business decision ever had. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Sophie," she replied, unconsciously stepping closer. "And this is Luna. She's sick, and I don't know what to do." Without hesitation, Michael signaled to Maria, "Could you bring another plate, please? And maybe some water and some plain chicken for the puppy?" Sophie's eyes widened with disbelief. "Really? You'd do that for us?" As Maria brought the food, Michael watched Sophie tear small pieces of chicken, feeding Luna first, before taking a bite herself. The simple act of selflessness from someone so young and desperate moved him in ways he hadn't felt in years. "Where are your parents, Sophie?" he asked carefully. Her face clouded over. "My mama went to heaven 6 months ago. She got really sick, and the doctors couldn't help her anymore." She paused, stroking Luna's fur. "We've been living in the park since then. The shelters won't take Luna." Michael's heart clenched. His own childhood had been shattered by tragedy, but he'd had resources, family, medical care. This little girl had nothing but an abandoned puppy and her own resilience. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said softly. "That must be very hard." Sophie nodded, tears threatening to spill. "She used to tell me stories about my daddy. She said he was a good man who had to go away before I was born, but that may be someday." She trailed off, shaking her head. "It's just stories, though." Something twisted in Michael's chest, a recognition he couldn't quite name. He'd walked away from relationships before, focused entirely on building his company, convinced that his disability made him unworthy of love or family. "Sophie," he said, reaching into his wallet, "I want to help you. This should cover a hotel room for tonight and food for both of you." She stared at the money with wide eyes. "I can't take this. Mama taught me not to take things from strangers." "Then we won't be strangers," Michael said with a smile. "I'm Michael, and I think your mama would want you to be safe." Sophie hesitated, then slowly reached out and took his hand instead of the money. Her small fingers were cold, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "December 23rd, she whispered, her voice taking on a strange, distant quality. "That's when everything changes for you, Mr. Michael. when the miracle happens. Michael's blood ran cold. December 23rd was exactly 1 week away. "What did you say?" Sophie blinked, as if coming out of a trance. I don't know. Sometimes I just say things. Mama said I got it from my daddy's side." She looked confused, almost frightened by her own words. The hair on Michael's arms stood up. How could this child know anything about his life, let alone speak of miracles? He'd stopped believing in those 3 decades ago. Michael couldn't sleep that night. Sophie's words echoed in his mind. December 23rd. That's when everything changes for you. He'd driven his wheelchair-accessible car to 3 different hotels before finding one that would accept Luna, leaving Sophie and her puppy safe with enough money for a week. The next morning, he found himself breaking routine for the first time in years. Instead of going straight to his office, he drove to the small hotel on the outskirts of downtown. He found Sophie sitting on the floor of her room, Luna curled up in her lap, both of them looking more rested than they had the day before. "Mr. Michael!" Sophie's face lit up when she saw him. "You came back." "I brought breakfast," he said, holding up a bag from the bakery down the street. "And I called a veterinarian friend. She's willing to see Luna this afternoon." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "You're so kind. Nobody's ever been this nice to us." As they ate together, Michael studied Sophie's face. There was something hauntingly familiar about her features, the shape of her eyes, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. But he pushed the thought away. He'd never had children, never even been in a relationship long enough to consider it. "Tell me about your mama," he said gently. Sophie's expression grew soft and sad. Her name was Elena. She was really beautiful, with long, dark hair and the prettiest laugh. She worked at a flower shop before she got sick. She paused, scratching Luna behind the ears. "She used to tell me about when she was younger, how she fell in love with a man who was hurt and sad, but who had the biggest heart in the world." Michael's coffee cup trembled in his hands. Elena. The name stirred something deep in his memory, a ghost of a feeling he'd buried long ago. "She said he was in a wheelchair," Sophie continued innocently. "But that didn't matter because love isn't about walking or running. It's about being brave enough to let someone see your heart." The room seemed to spin around Michael. Elena Rodriguez. The memory hit him like a physical blow. 9 years ago, after a particularly difficult board meeting, he'd stopped at a small flower shop to buy something for his assistant's birthday. The woman behind the counter had been radiant, with warm brown eyes and a smile that had made him forget his own limitations for the first time in decades. They dated for 6 months. Elena had been patient with his walls, gentle with his fears, and had seen past his wheelchair to the man he'd forgotten he could be. But when she started talking about the future, about family and children, Michael had panicked. He'd convinced himself that he was too damaged, too broken to give her the life she deserved. "I think my daddy was scared," Sophie said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "Mama said fear makes people do things they don't really want to do." Michael's hands shook as he reached for his phone. "Sophie, what was your mama's last name?" "Rodriguez," she replied. "Elena Rodriguez." The world tilted on its axis. Michael excused himself to the bathroom, where he splashed cold water on his face and stared at his reflection. The timeline was impossible to ignore. Sophie was 8 years old. Elena had gotten pregnant 9 years ago, right around the time he'd ended their relationship because he'd been too terrified to believe he deserved happiness. When he returned to the room, Sophie was humming softly to Luna, a melody that stirred another memory. Elena used to hum that same song while she arranged flowers, her hands moving with practiced grace. "Mr. Michael," Sophie said suddenly, "do you believe in angels?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Why?" "Because Mama said that sometimes angels come disguised as people who need help. She said that maybe the person who needs help is really helping the person who's helping them. She looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too wise for her age. Maybe that's what's happening with us. Michael spent the rest of the day in a daze. He took Sophie and Luna to the veterinarian, who confirmed that Luna was malnourished but would recover with proper care. He found himself buying dog food, toys, and a proper leash, telling himself he was just being kind to a child in need. But as evening approached, he found himself asking the question that had been building all day. "Sophie, did your mama ever tell you your daddy's name?" Sophie looked up from where she was playing with Luna on the hotel room floor. She said his name was Michael Harrison. She said he was the best man she ever knew, even if he didn't believe it himself. The words hung in the air between them, like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs as he stared at the little girl who might be his daughter, the child he'd never known existed. "Sophie," he whispered, "I think I knew your mama." That night, Michael sat in his penthouse apartment, staring at the box he'd pulled from the back of his closet. Inside were photographs, ticket stubs, and a pressed flower, the only physical remnants of his relationship with Elena Rodriguez. His hands trembled as he held up a photo of Elena laughing at something off-camera, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. The timing was undeniable. Sophie had been born exactly 9 months after his last night with Elena. The night he'd told her he couldn't be the man she needed, that his disability made him inadequate for the family she wanted. The night she'd cried and begged him to reconsider, telling him that love was stronger than fear. He'd been so convinced he was protecting her from a lifetime of burden that he'd never considered she might already be carrying his child. The next morning, Michael arrived at the hotel to find Sophie teaching Luna to sit. The puppy's health had improved dramatically overnight with proper food and care, and Sophie's own color looked better too. "I've been thinking," Michael said, settling his wheelchair next to where she sat on the floor. "You and Luna shouldn't have to stay in a hotel. I have a big house with a yard where Luna could run and play." Sophie's eyes widened. "You mean live with you?" "Would you like that?" Michael asked, his heart racing. He couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Not until he was certain. But every moment spent with her felt like discovering a piece of himself he'd lost long ago. "More than anything," Sophie whispered. "But are you sure? We don't have much to give back." Michael knelt down to her level, his chair allowing him to look directly into her eyes. "Sophie, you've already given me more than you know. You've reminded me what it feels like to care about someone other than myself." As they drove to his house in the suburbs, Sophie pressed her face to the window, watching the world pass by. "Mr. Michael, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think my mama can see us? From heaven?" Michael's throat tightened. "I think if anyone could find a way to watch over the people they love, it would be your mama." Sophie nodded solemnly. "She told me once that love doesn't die when people go to heaven. It just changes shape." She looked at him with those impossibly wise eyes. "Maybe that's why you found us. Maybe Mama's love changed shape into kindness." That afternoon, Michael called in favors from every connection he had. Within hours, Sophie was enrolled in the local elementary school. Luna had an appointment with the city's best veterinarian, and a social worker was expediting temporary guardianship papers. To anyone watching, he was simply a wealthy man helping a child in need. But Michael knew the truth was far more complicated. That evening, as Sophie explored her new room, a guest bedroom Michael had hastily converted with furniture and toys, he found himself studying family photos on his mantel. His parents, dead for 5 years. His sister, who lived in California with her own family. None of them knew about Elena. None of them knew about the possibility that they might have a granddaughter and niece they'd never met. "Mr. Michael?" Sophie appeared in the doorway, Luna at her heels. "Are you sad?" "Just thinking," he said softly. She walked over and climbed onto the sofa beside his chair. Mama used to get that look when she was remembering something that hurt and felt good at the same time. "You're very observant." "Mama said I get that from my daddy too." Sophie leaned against his arm. She said he was the smartest man she ever knew, but sometimes smart people think too much about the wrong things. Michael's heart clenched. Elena had known him so well, had seen through his defenses to the fears that drove him. What else did she tell you about him? That he was hurt when he was little, and it made him afraid to get close to people. But that under all that fear he had the biggest heart in the world. Sophie looked up at him. She said, "If I ever met him, I should tell him that fear is just love, trying to protect itself." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. They were Elena's words, her wisdom, spoken through the lips of the daughter he was becoming more certain was his. "Sophie," he said carefully, "tomorrow is December 23rd, the day you said something would change for me. Do you remember saying that?" Sophie nodded, her expression growing distant again. "Sometimes I just know things. Mama said it was a gift, but it scared me. I don't want to be different." "Different isn't bad," Michael said gently. "Different can be miraculous." That night, as he lay in bed listening to Sophie's soft breathing from the room next door, Michael found himself praying for the first time in 30 years. Not for his legs to work. He'd given up that hope decades ago. But for the courage to face whatever tomorrow might bring, and for the wisdom to be the father Sophie deserved, whether she was his daughter or not. December 23rd dawned grey and cold, with snow threatening in the heavy clouds overhead. Michael woke with a strange sensation in his chest. Not pain, but anticipation, as if his body was preparing for something his mind couldn't understand. Sophie was already awake, sitting by the window in her pajamas, with Luna curled in her lap. She looked different somehow, more ethereal, as if she were only half present in the world. "It's today," she said without turning around. "The day everything changes." Michael's hands gripped the wheels of his chair. "Sophie, what do you mean? How do you know these things?" She turned to face him, and her eyes held a depth of knowledge that seemed impossible for an 8-year-old. "Mama visits me in dreams. She told me that today you'll remember what it feels like to be whole." "Honey, I need you to understand something," Michael said gently. "I can't walk. I haven't been able to walk since I was 12 years old. That's not something that just changes." Sophie smiled with heartbreaking serenity. "Mama said you'd say that. She said you stopped believing in miracles a long time ago." Michael spent the morning in his home office, trying to focus on work, while Sophie played with Luna in the living room. But concentration was impossible. Every few minutes, he found himself watching her, studying her profile, looking for traces of himself in her features. At noon, Dr. James Carter arrived for Michael's monthly physical therapy session. It was routine maintenance, exercises to keep his upper body strong and prevent muscle atrophy in his legs. "You seem different today," Dr. Carter observed as they worked through the familiar routine. "Less tense." "I've been thinking about making some changes," Michael said, not mentioning the little girl who'd turned his world upside down. "Change can be good," Dr. Carter said, checking Michael's reflexes with practiced efficiency. "Your muscle tone is actually better than it's been in years, and your color." He paused, frowning. "Michael, I'm going to try something." Dr. Carter positioned himself near Michael's feet and pressed firmly against his soul. "Did you feel that?" Michael started to shake his head, then stopped. Something had flickered through his consciousness, not quite sensation, but awareness. I'm not sure." Dr. Carter's eyes widened. He tried again, this time with a small needle. "How about now?" Michael's breath caught. It was faint, impossibly faint, but something was there. I think I felt something. That's impossible, Doctor, Carter murmured, but his voice held wonder rather than disbelief. After 30 years, nerve damage like yours doesn't just start healing. From the living room came the sound of Sophie's laughter, clear and bright as silver bells. Michael looked toward the doorway where she stood watching them, Luna at her side. Sometimes impossible things happen, Sophie said softly. Mama said miracles are just love, finding a way to fix what was broken. Dr. Carter looked between Michael and Sophie, confusion evident on his face. Michael, who is this child? Her name is Sophie, Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. And I think she might be my daughter. The afternoon passed in a blur of sensations Michael hadn't felt in 3 decades. Tingling in his toes, warmth spreading through his calves. Dr. Carter ran test after test, his medical training warring with the evidence of his own eyes. The nerve pathways are regenerating, he said in amazement. It's like your body is rewiring itself. I've never seen anything like it. Sophie sat beside Michael's chair, her small hand resting on his arm. Don't be scared, she said quietly. Mama said you might be scared when it happens. I'm not scared, Michael lied, but his heart was racing. I just don't understand. You don't have to understand, Sophie said with the wisdom of someone far older than her years. You just have to believe. As evening approached, Michael found himself in his living room, staring at his legs beneath the blanket. They looked the same as always, thin from decades of disuse, pale from lack of circulation. But inside, he could feel something awakening, like a sleeping giant stirring to life. Sophie, he said, his voice shaking, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. She looked up from where she was brushing Luna's fur. Okay. Did your mama ever tell you that I might be your father? Sophie's brushing stopped. For a long moment she was silent, then, slowly, she nodded. She said you were too scared to stay, but that didn't mean you didn't love us. She said love sometimes wears different masks. Tears streamed down Michael's face. I'm so sorry, Sophie. I should have been there. I should have been brave enough to stay. Sophie set down the brush and walked over to him, with infinite gentleness. She took his hands in hers. Mama said you'd say that too. She said to tell you that you found your way back to us when we needed you most. At that moment, Michael felt something shift inside him. Not just in his legs, but in his heart. For the first time in 30 years, he felt complete. Are you ready? Sophie asked. And somehow he knew exactly what she meant. Michael nodded, fear and hope warring in his chest. I'm ready. The moment stretched between them like a held breath. Sophie's hands were warm in his, and Michael could feel something extraordinary building in the air around them, a sense of possibility that seemed to make the very atoms vibrate with anticipation. Close your eyes, Sophie whispered, and Michael found himself obeying without question. Now think about walking, she said softly, not about how you can't, but about how you used to. Remember running through grass when you were little. Remember what it felt like to dance. Michael's mind drifted back to memories he'd buried for decades. Being 7 years old, racing his sister across their backyard. At 11, dancing with his mother in the kitchen while she cooked dinner. The simple joy of movement, of feeling connected to the earth beneath his feet. I remember, he breathed. Good, Sophie said. Now remember why you want to walk again. Images flooded Michael's mind, not of boardrooms or business success, but of simple things. Chasing Luna through the yard, dancing with Sophie at her wedding someday. Standing to hug her when she needed comfort, being the father she deserved in every way possible. I want to walk so I can be better for you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're already perfect for me, Sophie replied. But Mama said you needed to remember that healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. Michael felt warmth spreading through his legs, starting from his toes and moving upward like honey through his veins. It wasn't painful. It was like coming home after a long journey. "Open your eyes," Sophie said. Michael opened his eyes to find Sophie standing a few feet away, her arms outstretched. Luna sat beside her, tail wagging as if she understood the magnitude of what was happening. "Try to stand," Sophie said simply. Michael's rational mind rebelled. He'd tried to stand thousands of times over the years, in physical therapy, in dreams, in moments of desperate hope. It had never worked. It couldn't work. But something in Sophie's eyes silenced his doubts. Slowly, carefully, he placed his hands on the arms of his wheelchair and pushed. His legs trembled. For a moment, he thought he would fall. Then, impossibly, miraculously, he was standing. The sensation was overwhelming, the floor solid beneath his feet. His body swaying slightly as muscles remembered how to balance. He looked down at his legs in wonder, then up at Sophie's radiant face. "I'm standing," he whispered. "You're standing?" Sophie confirmed, tears streaming down her cheeks. Michael took one tentative step forward, then another. His legs felt weak, unsteady, but they were working. After 30 years of silence, his body was speaking again. "How is this possible?" he asked, even as he continued moving toward Sophie. "Love," Sophie said simply. "Mama's love, your love, my love. It all came together to make something impossible become possible." Michael reached Sophie and dropped to his knees in front of her, pulling her into his arms. "You're my miracle," he sobbed. "You're my daughter and you're my miracle." Sophie hugged him tight, her small arms surprisingly strong. "I love you, Daddy." The word hit Michael like a lightning bolt. Daddy. He'd never thought he'd hear that word directed at him, never imagined it could carry such weight, such pure joy. "I love you too, Sophie," he said, his voice breaking. "I love you so much." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other while Luna danced around them, sensing the joy and celebration in the air. When they finally separated, Michael looked into Sophie's eyes and saw something that made his heart skip. She was fading. Not physically, but something essential about her was becoming translucent, as if she were slowly dissolving into light. "Sophie," he said, alarmed. "What's happening?" She smiled with infinite sadness and peace. "I have to go now, Daddy. I was only allowed to stay long enough to help you find your way back to yourself." "No," Michael said, panic rising in his chest. "You can't leave. I just found you. We're supposed to be a family." Sophie cupped his face in her small hands. "We are a family. We always will be. But I'm not supposed to be here anymore. I was supposed to go with Mama, but I couldn't leave you alone and hurting." Michael's mind reeled. "You mean you're not alive?" "I am alive," Sophie said firmly, "just not in the same way you are. Mama and we're together now, but we'll always be watching over you." Tears streamed down Michael's face. "I don't understand. If you're not real, then how?" "Love is real," Sophie said, growing fainter by the moment. "The miracle is real. Your healing is real. I may not be able to stay, but everything I've given you, the ability to walk, the reminder of what it means to hope, the knowledge that you're capable of love, that's all real." Michael reached for her, but his hands passed through her like she was made of moonlight. "Don't go, please don't go." Sophie's form continued to fade, but her voice remained clear and strong. "I'm not going anywhere, Daddy. I'm just going home. But a part of me will always be with you. Every time you walk, every time you help someone who needs it, every time you remember that miracles are possible. That's me." "I don't know how to live without you," Michael whispered. "You lived without me for 8 years, Sophie said, with a gentle smile. "But now you know how to love without fear. That's the real miracle." Luna whined softly, and Michael realized she was still fully present, still solid and real. He looked down at the little golden retriever, then back at Sophie's nearly transparent form. "Luna stays with you," Sophie said, understanding his confusion. "She's real. She needs you and you need her. She's my gift to you, a reminder that love comes in many forms." Michael nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "Take care of her," Sophie said, her voice now barely a whisper. "And remember, Mama and I love you. We always have, and we always will." With that, Sophie faded completely, leaving behind only the faint scent of roses and the echo of her laughter. Michael knelt on the floor of his living room, Luna pressed against his side, and wept for the daughter he'd lost and found and lost again. But as his tears fell, he realized something profound. He was kneeling. He was feeling the carpet beneath his knees, the strength in his legs, the miracle of movement returned. Sophie had given him everything, his daughter's love, his body's healing, and most importantly, his heart's capacity to believe in the impossible. 3 months after Sophie's visit, Michael stood in the chapel of Chicago Memorial Hospital, preparing to deliver the eulogy at a memorial service for Elena Rodriguez. It had taken him weeks to track down Elena's co-workers, to learn the full story of their daughter's final months. Elena had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer when Sophie was 7. As the disease progressed, Elena had made arrangements for Sophie to be placed in foster care, but the night before the transfer, both mother and daughter had disappeared from the hospital. They'd been found 3 days later in Elena's old apartment, both having passed peacefully in their sleep. The official cause of death for Sophie was listed as pneumonia, brought on by exposure and malnutrition, but Michael knew the truth was more complex. Sophie had chosen to stay with her mother, even in death, rather than face the world alone. Elena Rodriguez was a woman who believed in miracles, Michael said to the small gathering of friends and former co-workers. She believed that love could overcome any obstacle, that healing was possible even in the most broken places. He paused, looking out at the faces of people who had known Elena's kindness, her strength, her unwavering faith in the goodness of humanity. "Elena and I knew each other briefly many years ago," he continued. "I was too afraid to appreciate what I had with her, too convinced that my own limitations made me unworthy of her love. But Elena saw past those limitations to the man I could become." Luna sat at his feet, her presence a constant reminder of the gift Sophie had left behind. In the months since Sophie's visit, Michael had established the Elena and Sophie Rodriguez Foundation, providing housing and medical care for homeless families. He'd also begun visiting children's hospitals, sharing his story of healing and hope. "What I learned from Elena and from Sophie is that miracles don't happen because we deserve them," Michael said. "They happen because love refuses to give up, even when faced with the impossible." After the service, Michael walked to the cemetery where Eleanor and Sophie were buried side by side. He'd had a bench installed nearby, where he came to sit and talk to them whenever the weight of his memories became too heavy. "I'm walking again," he told them, speaking to the simple granite stones. "Every day I wake up and I can feel my legs. I can run, I can dance, I can chase Luna through the yard. And every step I take, I think of you both." Luna settled beside the bench, her head resting on Michael's shoe. She'd grown into a beautiful, healthy dog, and she seemed to understand that these visits were important, that this was where their strange, wonderful journey had begun. "I understand now," Michael continued, "that Sophie's gift wasn't just healing my body. It was healing my heart, teaching me that love isn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about being brave enough to stay even when you're scared." A gentle breeze stirred the trees overhead, and Michael could have sworn he heard the faint echo of Sophie's laughter carried on the wind. "I know you're together now," he said softly. "I know you're watching over me. And I want you to know that I'm not wasting the miracle you gave me. I'm using it to help other people believe in the impossible." As he rose to leave, Michael noticed something that made his heart skip. On Sophie's grave, where there had been no flowers that morning, a single white rose had appeared. Its petals were perfect, untouched by the autumn wind, and it seemed to glow with its own inner light. Michael knelt down and touched the rose gently. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." That evening, Michael sat in his living room. Luna curled up at his feet and opened his laptop. He'd been working on a book about his experience, not for fame or recognition, but because he'd received thousands of letters from people who'd heard his story and wanted to share their own moments of miraculous healing. As he typed, he thought about the letter he'd received that morning from a young woman in a wheelchair who'd read about his foundation. She'd written about her own fears, her own certainty that disability meant she was unworthy of love. Michael had already scheduled a meeting with her for the following week. The phone rang, interrupting his work. It was Dr. Carter, calling with the results of Michael's latest neurological tests. "Michael, I've been studying your case for months," Dr. Carter said, his voice filled with wonder. "And I have to tell you, from a medical standpoint, what happened to you is completely impossible. Your nerve damage was irreversible. The scar tissue, the muscle atrophy, it should have prevented any recovery." "But I'm walking," Michael pointed out with a smile. "You're not just walking," Dr. Carter replied. "Your nervous system has completely regenerated. It's like you have the spine of a 20-year-old. I've never seen anything like it in 40 years of practice." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that whatever happened to you defies every law of medicine I know. It's a miracle in the truest sense of the word." After hanging up, Michael looked at Luna, who had been watching him with those intelligent, knowing eyes. "Did you hear that, girl?" he said, scratching behind her ears. "We're officially part of a miracle." Luna wagged her tail and nuzzled his hand, and Michael could have sworn he felt Sophie's presence in the room, not sad or ethereal as she'd been in their final moments together, but joyful and proud. That night, as Michael went to bed in his own house, walking up the stairs on his own two legs, he whispered a prayer of gratitude, not just for his healing, but for the reminder that love never truly dies. It simply transforms, becoming stronger and more beautiful with each act of courage, each moment of hope, each decision to believe in the impossible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to share the miracle he'd been given. But tonight, he was simply a man who had been loved by his daughter, who had been brave enough to let that love change him, and who would spend the rest of his life proving worthy of the extraordinary gift he'd received. In the distance, carried on the night wind, Michael heard the faint sound of a child's laughter mixing with a woman's gentle humming. He smiled, knowing that somewhere beyond the veil between worlds, Elena and Sophie were together, watching over him with love that transcended death itself. Luna stretched and settled closer to his feet, a living reminder that miracles come in many forms. And Michael Harrison, once broken and afraid, now walked through life as living proof that love never gives up, and that the impossible is simply another word for hope waiting to be born. 5 years had passed since Sophie's miraculous visit, and Michael's life had transformed beyond recognition. Standing in the grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton, he watched hundreds of families whose lives had been touched by the Elena and Sophie Rodriguez Foundation. Children who had been homeless now played in designer clothes donated by corporate sponsors. "Mr. Harrison," called Rebecca Martinez, a social worker who had become his closest collaborator, "the Peterson family is here. You remember, the little girl with leukemia whose treatment we sponsored?" Michael turned to see 8-year-old Amy Peterson running toward him, her once bald head now covered with thick, curly hair. Behind her, her parents beamed with the kind of joy that only comes after surviving the unthinkable. Mr. Michael. Amy threw her arms around his waist. Look, my hair grew back. Michael knelt to her level, his heart swelling. You look absolutely beautiful, Amy. How are you feeling? Strong, she said with a grin that reminded him achingly of Sophie. Mama says I'm strong because an angel was watching over me. As Amy ran back to her parents, Michael felt the familiar flutter in his chest that always came when children spoke of angels. In 5 years, he'd helped over 2,000 families, and countless children had mentioned seeing or dreaming about a little girl with brown hair who told them everything would be okay. Luna, now a distinguished 13-year-old golden retriever, pressed against his leg. Her muzzle was grey with age, but her eyes still held the same intelligence and knowing that had marked her from the beginning. You feel it too, don't you, girl? Michael whispered, scratching behind her ears. She's still here, isn't she? That evening, Michael stood at the podium to address the crowd. The Foundation's annual gala had become Chicago's most anticipated charity event, raising millions for homeless families and children's medical care. 5 years ago, he began, I thought I understood what it meant to be broken. I believed that my wheelchair defined my limitations, that my past mistakes made me unworthy of love or family. His voice carried across the silent ballroom. I was wrong on every count. He gestured to the families scattered throughout the audience. These children, these parents, they've taught me that brokenness isn't about physical limitations or past failures. Real brokenness is giving up on the possibility that tomorrow can be different from today. In the back of the room, Michael spotted a figure that made his breath catch. A woman with long, dark hair stood near the exit, her profile achingly familiar. For a moment, his heart raced. Could it be Eleanor? But as she turned, he realized it was someone else entirely, though the resemblance was striking. Every child we help, Michael continued, every family we house, every medical bill we pay, it's not charity, it's investment in the miracle of human resilience. It's proof that love multiplies when we have the courage to share it. The applause was thunderous, but Michael barely heard it. The woman in the back had caught his attention for a reason he couldn't yet understand. Something about her presence felt significant, connected to the strange sense of anticipation that had been building in his chest for weeks. The weeks following the gala brought an unexpected visitor into Michael's life. Maria Rodriguez, Elena's younger sister, had been watching his work from afar and finally found the courage to introduce herself. Standing in his office at the Foundation, she looked so much like Elena that Michael's breath caught in his throat. I've been wanting to meet you for years, Maria said, her voice carrying the same musical quality that had made Elena's laugh so memorable. Elena told me about you before she died. She made me promise that if anything ever happened to her and Sophie, I would find you. Michael's hands shook as he gestured for her to sit. What did she want you to tell me? Maria's eyes filled with tears. That she never stopped loving you, that she understood why you left, and she forgave you. But more than that, she wanted you to know that Sophie chose to come to you. That's impossible, Michael whispered. Sophie died before she ever met me. Maria smiled through her tears. Eleanor always said Sophie was special, that she could see things others couldn't. In her final weeks, Sophie drew hundreds of pictures, all of the same man in a wheelchair, surrounded by light. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook. Sophie's drawings. Eleanor saved them all and made me promise to give them to you when the time was right. Michael opened the notebook with trembling hands. Page after page showed a man in a wheelchair, but in each successive drawing, the man was surrounded by more light, more children, more hope. The final drawing showed the man standing, arms outstretched, with a little girl and a golden dog at his side. At the bottom of the last page, in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "For my daddy, who will remember how to fly." She knew, Michael breathed. Somehow she knew everything that was going to happen. Maria nodded. Elena said that love creates its own miracles, that maybe Sophie's spirit found a way to visit you because your love for Elena never really died. As Michael clutched the notebook to his chest, he felt something shift in the universe around him. For 5 years, he'd wondered if Sophie's visit had been real or just a grief-induced hallucination. Now he had proof that a dying child had been drawing pictures of their future together. "There's something else," Maria said quietly. "Elena left something for you. Something she'd been saving since Sophie was born." She handed him a small velvet box. Inside was a simple gold ring, a man's wedding band, and a note in Elena's handwriting. "For Michael, when he's ready to believe he deserves love." Michael's vision blurred with tears. "I don't understand." "Elena bought that ring right after Sophie was born," Maria explained. "She always believed you'd come back to them someday. When she realized she was dying, she made me promise to give it to you when you'd learned to love yourself." Standing in his office, surrounded by photos of the families he'd helped and the weight of 5 years of healing, Michael slipped the ring onto his finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. 6 months later, Michael stood in the same chapel where he delivered Elena's eulogy. But this time, the atmosphere was filled with joy rather than grief. Maria walked down the aisle in a simple white dress, her face radiant with happiness, carrying a bouquet of white roses, Elena's favorite flowers. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Michael Harrison and Maria Rodriguez, 2 souls who have found in each other the courage to love without fear." Michael's hands trembled as he took Maria's fingers in his. The wedding ring Elena had chosen for him 8 years ago gleamed on his finger, no longer a symbol of what he'd lost, but of what love could create when given the chance to grow. "Maria," Michael said, his voice strong and clear, "5 years ago, I thought I was too broken to deserve love. You've taught me that brokenness isn't a disqualification, it's an invitation for love to work miracles. I promised to love you with the same fearless devotion that brought us together." Maria's eyes filled with tears as she spoke her vows. "Michael, my sister saw your heart before you did. She knew that under your fear was a capacity for love that could change the world. I promise to stand beside you as we continue Elena and Sophie's work." When they kissed, sealing their union, the chapel filled with the sound of applause and something else, the faint echo of a child's laughter, carried on air that smelled of roses and hope. The reception was held at the Foundation's main facility, surrounded by dozens of families whose lives had been transformed by their work. Children who had been homeless now played in the gardens Michael had built in Elena and Sophie's memory. "Look around," Maria whispered to Michael as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. "This is what love builds when we're brave enough to let it work through us." Michael spun her gently, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms. "Do you think they're here? Elena and Sophie?" "I know they are," Maria replied with certainty. "They're in every child's laugh, every family reunion, every moment when someone who's lost hope finds it again." As the evening progressed, Michael found himself in conversation with Dr. Carter, who had become not just his physician, but a close friend and researcher into what they'd begun calling healing miracles. "The network is growing," Dr. Carter reported quietly. 15 confirmed cases now, all following the same pattern. Terminal children making prophetic drawings, deceased children appearing to paralyzed adults, complete neural regeneration. Later that night, as Michael and Maria settled into their hotel suite, they found an unexpected gift waiting for them. On the bedside table sat a small wrapped package with no card or identification. Inside was a photograph that shouldn't have existed. It showed Elena holding infant Sophie in the hospital, but in the background, clearly visible though translucent, stood Michael in his wedding tuxedo, his hand resting gently on Elena's shoulder. Michael turned the photo over and found a message written in Elena's familiar handwriting. Love finds a way to be present, even when we think we're absent. 2 years into their marriage, Michael and Maria faced their greatest challenge yet. Maria was pregnant, but the pregnancy was high risk, complicated by a genetic condition that threatened both her life and their unborn child's. As she lay in the hospital bed, monitors beeping around her, Michael felt the familiar darkness of fear creeping back into his heart. The baby is showing signs of severe developmental delays, Dr. Sarah Chen, their obstetrician, explained gently. And Maria's blood pressure is dangerously high. We need to discuss our options. Michael gripped Maria's hand, his wedding ring, Elena's ring, warm against his skin. What are our options? We could induce labor now at 32 weeks. The baby might survive, but the developmental issues would be severe, or we could wait and hope. But that puts Maria at risk. Maria's eyes were closed, exhaustion evident in every line of her face. I want to wait, she whispered. I can feel her, Michael. She's fighting to be here. Her? Michael asked, his heart skipping. Maria smiled weakly. I know it's a girl. I dream about her every night. She looks just like Sophie. But with your eyes, and Michael, in my dreams, Eleanor is holding her, teaching her things I can't understand. That night, Michael sat in the hospital chapel, Luna at his feet. The old golden retriever had been showing her age lately, moving slowly, sleeping more, but she'd insisted on coming to the hospital. I need help, Michael whispered to the empty chapel. I know you're out there, Sophie. Elena, I've felt you both through all the miracles of the past 7 years, but now I need you more than ever. Suddenly, Luna whimpered softly and pressed against his leg. Michael opened his eyes to find a little girl sitting in the pew across from him. But this wasn't Sophie. This child was younger, maybe 4 or 5, with Maria's dark hair and his own green eyes. Hello, Daddy, the little girl said with a voice like silver bells. Michael's breath caught. Who are you? I'm Isabella, she said simply. I'm your daughter, the one who's trying to be born. That's impossible. You're still in Mama's tummy, I know. Isabella smiled with the same serene wisdom that had marked Sophie's supernatural visits. But Aunt Sophie taught me how to visit you, just like she visited you before I was conceived. Michael's mind reeled. Aunt Sophie? She's taking care of me while I decide whether to stay or go. It's very hard to be born when your body wants to be different from other babies, but Sophie says that different doesn't mean broken. Tears streamed down Michael's face. Isabella, please. Your mama needs you to be strong. We both need you. Isabella stood and walked to him, her small hand reaching out to touch his cheek. The contact was electric, warm, filled with love so pure it took his breath away. Daddy, you have to choose, she said gently. I can be born with the problems the doctors see, and you and Mama will spend your lives helping me be the best version of myself I can be, or I can go be with Aunt Sophie. What do you want, sweetheart? Isabella's eyes sparkled with determination. I want to be born, Daddy. I want to help you and Mama show other families that different children are gifts, not burdens. Isabella's second birthday party was held in the Foundation's memorial garden, surrounded by families whose lives had been transformed by Michael and Maria's work. At 2 years old, Isabella moved through the world with the deliberate grace characteristic of children with Down syndrome, but her eyes held the same supernatural awareness that had marked Sophie's visits. Daddy, Isabella said, tugging at Michael's sleeve as he talked with visiting donors, the sad lady needs help. Michael looked around the crowded garden, but saw only smiling faces. Which sad lady, sweetheart? Isabella pointed toward the garden's entrance, where a woman in her 30s stood alone, watching the celebration from a distance. Even from across the garden, Michael could see the tension in her posture. "How did you know she was sad?" Michael asked, lifting Isabella into his arms. "She has grey around her heart," Isabella said, matter-of-factly, as if this were the most natural observation in the world. "Like you did before Sophie helped you." Michael had grown accustomed to Isabella's unusual insights over the past 2 years. She seemed to see emotions as colours, could sense when someone was grieving or afraid, and had an uncanny ability to know exactly what words would bring comfort. As they approached the woman, Michael could see she was clutching a folder of papers and appeared to be arguing with herself about whether to stay or leave. "Excuse me," Michael said gently. "I'm Michael Harrison. Are you here for the foundation?" The woman turned, and Michael saw tear tracks on her cheeks. She was younger than he'd first thought, with auburn hair and exhausted eyes. "I'm Sarah Williams," she said, her voice shaky. "I saw your story on the news about your daughter and how you help families. I thought maybe." She looked down at Isabella with wonder. "She's beautiful." Isabella studied Sarah with intense concentration, then reached out her small arms. "Hug for the broken heart." Sarah's composure crumbled. She gathered Isabella into her arms, sobbing quietly against the little girl's shoulder. Isabella patted Sarah's back with gentle expertise. "It's okay," Isabella whispered. "The grey will go away when you stop carrying the heavy thing by yourself." Michael guided them to a quiet bench. "What's the heavy thing you're carrying, Sarah?" Sarah opened the folder with shaking hands. "My son, Tommy. He's 5, and he has cerebral palsy. We've been living in our car for 3 months because I can't work enough hours to afford both his medical care and housing. I've been to every agency, every charity, every government office. Everyone says they want to help, but there's always a waiting list, always another form to fill out." Isabella climbed onto the bench beside Sarah and took her face in her small hands. "Mama loves you very much," she said with startling clarity. "But you're scared because love feels big and you feel small." That afternoon, Michael and Maria brought Sarah and Tommy to see the Foundation's newest facility, a residential complex designed specifically for families with special needs children. Tommy was a bright, cheerful boy whose physical limitations hadn't dimmed his enthusiasm for life. "We have an apartment available," Maria told Sarah. "It's part of our supported living program. You'd have access to medical care, childcare, job training, whatever you need." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I can't afford." "The Foundation covers the costs," Michael interrupted gently. "This is what we do." 10 years had passed since Sophie's miraculous visit, and the Elena and Sophie Rodriguez Foundation had become a beacon of hope across the nation. What had started as one man's journey from brokenness to healing had grown into a movement that touched thousands of lives every year. Michael stood in his office, now grey-haired at 52, watching through the window as Isabella, now 10 years old, led a group of children with various disabilities through the Foundation's adaptive playground. Her Down syndrome had never slowed her determination to help others feel included and loved. "She's remarkable," said Dr. Carter, who had joined Michael for their monthly review of what they now called the Miracle Network. Over the years, they had documented 47 cases of supernatural healing, all connected by the common thread of children who had died young but found ways to continue their mission of love. "Every day, she reminds me that different isn't broken," Michael said, his voice filled with pride and wonder. "She sees people's hearts in ways I never could have imagined." Maria entered the office carrying a thick folder. "The applications for next year's family housing program," she said, setting it on Michael's desk. "We have over 3,000 families on the waiting list." Michael nodded. feeling the familiar weight of knowing that their resources, vast as they were, could never meet all the need in the world. But over the years, he'd learned that miracles weren't about solving every problem. They were about lighting candles in the darkness and trusting that love would multiply those small flames. "There's something else," Maria said softly. "Isabella had one of her dreams last night. She says Sophie visited her again." Michael's heart quickened. What did Sophie tell her? "That our work here is almost complete, that soon the foundation will be strong enough to continue without us, and will be called to help start similar programs in other countries." Through the window, Michael watched Isabella teaching a newly arrived boy with autism how to navigate the monkey bars designed for children with different abilities. The boy had been frightened and withdrawn when his family arrived at the foundation, but Isabella's patient guidance had drawn him out of his shell. "She also said," Maria continued, "that Luna is getting ready to go home to Sophie, that her job here is almost finished." Michael looked down at Luna, now 16 years old and moving slowly, but still alert and loving. The golden retriever had been his constant companion through every triumph and challenge of the past decade. A living bridge between the world of the living and whatever realm Sophie inhabited. "How much time?" Michael asked quietly. "Isabella thinks a few more weeks, but she says Luna isn't sad about it. She says Luna is excited to see Sophie again and tell her about all the families they've helped." That evening, Michael sat in the memorial garden where Eleanor and Sophie were buried, Luna resting peacefully at his feet. The garden had grown over the years, expanded to include memorials for dozens of children whose families had been helped by the foundation. 10 years, he said aloud, speaking to the granite stones that marked his daughter's grave. 10 years since you taught me that love never really dies, it just changes form. A gentle breeze stirred the roses planted around Sophie's grave, and Michael could have sworn he heard the faint echo of a child's laughter carried on the wind. "I know our time here is changing," he continued. "Isabella says we'll be called to help other families in other places, but wherever we go, whatever we do, your love will be the foundation of everything we build." Luna lifted her head and looked toward Sophie's grave, her tail wagging slowly. In that moment, Michael felt the presence he'd sensed so many times over the years: Sophie, Elena, and all the children whose love had transcended death to continue healing the world. "Thank you," Michael whispered, "for everything, for teaching me that miracles aren't about what we receive, but about what we have the courage to give. For showing me that love is the only force in the universe stronger than death itself." As the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Michael Harrison sat in peaceful gratitude, knowing that his greatest miracle hadn't been learning to walk again. It had been learning to love without fear, and discovering that when we have the courage to share our healing with others, love creates ripples that extend far beyond anything we can imagine. The foundation would continue its work long after he was gone, touching lives in ways he would never know. But tonight, surrounded by the memory of his daughter's love and the promise of tomorrow's possibilities, Michael was simply a man who had been blessed beyond measure, and who would spend whatever time remained to him, proving worthy of the extraordinary gift he had received.